Hello and welcome to another BAFTA Group panel. My name is Adam. I am a co-founder at Beta Jester Limited, and today I'm going to be your host for the panel on my first year, what to expect. With me are these three lovely panelists, who I'm now going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, starting with Reese.
Oh, damn it. I was hoping not to be first. Hi, I'm Reese. I'm a programmer at Bossa Studios. Currently working on I Am Fish.
Excellent. And now Abby.
Hello, my name's Abby. I work at Sumo Digital as an animator, and I'm currently working on Sackboy Big Adventure.
Awesome. Next up, Gabrielle.
Hi, I'm Gabriel. I'm also at Bossa Studios. I'm a studio producer, and I am literally working on Surgeon Simulator.
Fantastic. So, your first year, what to expect? Obviously, as people hopefully tune in, listening, settling down, grabbing your popcorn, you're going to be wondering about, maybe you've broken into the industry. We've had that. You've heard that panel, and now you'll think about, okay, what happens? It's a big, scary place, new studio. Maybe you're freelance. Maybe you started your own company. Maybe it's small. Maybe it's massive. Your first year is a really interesting time to sort of learn about the industry and what's involved. But as with anything, you get out of it what you put in. So we're going to start by chatting with the panel about what was the first lesson you learned when you started in your first year. The first thing that you really took to heart and have taken forward with you. And I'm going to start off with Abby.
So I think the biggest thing is also the most daunting thing is that you're actually working on a real commercial product with really high expectations and tight deadlines, and it's something you have to take very seriously. It's not like anything you've ever done before, and you kind of go in there and you don't really know anything either. Even if you're familiar with Maya or 3ds Max or Unreal Engine, then the workflow and process will be completely different as well. But that's okay, because it's the same with any project in the industry, and it's just really important to kind of digest that quite quickly, and then you'll just remember that you're going to keep learning forever.
Cool. Learning forever. I like that. That's a nice one. I keep looking at stuff and I'm like, oh, that's so cool, and then I'm going and learning it and that kind of thing. And every time I think I was about to say every time I think I've learned everything, I've never learned everything. I've got more stuff to go and do. Gabriel, what do you think? What was your first lesson that you learned when you first started?
So I was really nervous when I joined games, because it was a dream job. Oh yeah, fantastic! I'm in the games industry, and I wanted to put my best foot forwards. I think the thing that I learned eventually, and was really important, is that you don't have to have all the answers immediately. Sometimes the best skill you can have is just figuring out who to speak to get the answer. Right? You don't have to resolve every problem in yourself.
Awesome. And then finally, Reese.
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of what's already been said. The realization that you don't really know anything was probably my biggest lesson, and you are there to learn. It's for me as a programmer, you go through university, there's 4 years of university, you think, you know what, I know how to program, and then you start your first job, and it's I do not know how to program. And yeah, it is finding that balance between giving things a go yourself and knowing questions and knowing who to ask, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think the sort of theme of learning and actually the first thing you learn is you want to go and learn more is definitely something that comes up. An interesting one actually is obviously all of you have been in the industry a little while now, been doing really well, but I'm imagining a lot of you didn't start with the jobs that you have now. So it'd be interesting. So could you just sort of tell me what you did, what were you doing in your first year? What do you count as your first year as being in the industry, as it were? And we'll start with we'll keep switching around, and we'll start with Gabriel.
So I started out as QA. I had a very traditional introduction to the games industry. Right, started out as QA, eventually moved up to senior, and from senior moved into production. Funnily enough, through working with Reese, in fact.
That's awesome. Reese, you're gonna that was the call to you to follow
on. So yeah, I'm not sure when to count my first year. My first job out of university was a VR studio where I was the only employee.
Oh, wow.
It was a very small startup just outside Guildford, and I was there for 9 months before moving to 20 Cannons. And that was within my first, year of working. So I don't know what to count. What was the original question again? I forgot.
The question is essentially that what do you count as your first year? So I mean,
Right, yeah, somewhere around there, somewhere between like the first, I guess, 6 months of my first job and the first 6 months of 22 Cans.
Awesome. And then Abby?
That's really interesting because although it wasn't technically in games, I spent about 3 months working at MTV and did video
That's awesome.
editing there and worked with Nickelodeon as well and did some TV bumps. Although I wouldn't count that as necessarily like first year industry stuff, I would say like the lessons I learned there in terms of like fast media pipeline definitely carried over into my first year in the games industry where I was an intern at Sumo and I still work there now.
You see, this panel is about the game industry, but I want to ask about Nickelodeon now. I just want to know more about that. We'll save that for another panel.
Yes, definitely.
But it's interesting as well, I think, and Reese, you hit on it actually, is that some people, their entry, and in fact both of you did, their entry into the games industry is not as clear cut as some people think. You know, a lot of people think that they'll get their first job and it'll be with known games company and that's all they're doing. But actually there are so many routes, you know. I mean, even between all of us here, we've got internships, you've got setting up your own studio, you've got that traditional route, but then also maybe you work for a company that does games and other things and that kind of stuff. At what point, we'll start, we've gone back round, so we'll start with you, Reese. So at what point did you start to feel settled in what you were doing? You know, whether that was settled in the games industry or settled in knowing what you were doing. Was there a point at which it sort of started to switch over, or did it just transition gradually?
So settled into my like role as a programmer was somewhere between like 3 and 6 months. I say settled as in like when you start as a junior in I think most fields, you're not really contributing to the studio. There is a cost to training you, and you don't really know what you're doing. So I think it's somewhere between 3 and 6 months you feel like you actually start contributing.
Okay.
And sort of being able to work more independently and actually add things to the code base. Well, from a progress perspective.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like, it took until around my probation period until I really felt settled, because the most of what you do in the first few months is just get familiar with the pipeline and the software you're using, and with the team that you'll be working with as well, because that's just as important is bonding with the team. And then once you've developed those relationships with them, then that's when you really start to feel settled. It was even harder for me because I literally moved like to the opposite end of the country for my first job. I come from down south. So it was a completely change of life, new start. So you have to kind of battle with those sorts of things as well.
Okay, well, I feel weird now because like you guys were like, yeah, a few months, and I was like, it's like 2 years for me, right? Like, and that's because like I never saw myself working in the games industry for most of my career. I actually used to work in banking before I joined games. I joined as a QA. Had very little idea of what I was doing, and like I mentioned before, I was like, a little bit nervous. And eventually I became a senior, and I became a senior at a time of like a lot of change in the company. So I was conscious that I had like a responsibility to provide stability, but I felt like I knew less than everyone around me. And then when I joined the team with Reese, it was a big project. There was a lot to do, and I just kind of got my head down and did it. And like halfway through that, I realized, oh wait, no, I can do this. I'm settled in this. I'm good with this. I'm fine.
I mean,
Your confidence is definitely a big thing, right? When you first start, like it's really important not to be too confident, but like, having a little bit of confidence in yourself is really important in order to help you feel settled, and in order for people to, people will trust you as long as you're open and honest with them, and that also helps with being settled too.
I think all of you hit sort of that interesting nail where as a question, there's no right answer, and all of you demonstrate the fact that there are huge swathes of difference, and actually going into it and feeling, you can feel like you're not quite in there, or that it's all unreal or overwhelming and that kind of thing, and people do for years, and even then, it's not just because you don't feel settled doesn't mean you will never feel settled. And equally, if you do suddenly feel settled and feel like this is okay, that's not a thing to worry about. That's a good thing. Interesting though, especially Abby, you're talking about moving across the country and that kind of thing, and all of you sort of reflect on how you began. Did any of you do anything to prepare for that beginning? Did you do any setup? Did you do the research? Was there anything that you felt that you could have done that you didn't do beforehand before starting with that first company or starting that first job that you go back and tell people to do now? Start with you, Abby.
Oh my goodness. Like, I really wish that I'd spent more time doing fundamental work, because it was a little bit of a gap between working at university and then getting my first job in games. And I was working at MTV in between. So I hadn't been doing any 3D work for quite some time. So then as soon as I started my job in games, I was literally dropped straight into the deep end. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I need to know how to use Motion Builder, which is used before. And try and relearn and refocus on all my fundamentals. I guess my advice is just to, if you know what software you're going to be using, just make sure you familiarize yourself with it, with the UI and shortcuts, because as long as you know the fundamentals of it, then you can kind of transfer those fundamentals to any pipeline. So that's my guess there.
Cool. Gabriel?
I probably over prepared. Did a lot of research about like qualifications that were pertinent to like my sector in QA. Did my ISTQB, paid for that off my own back, and like that sort of stuff. And that stuff really helped. But I feel in retrospect I was probably focusing a bit too much on like the technical aspect of the role. As Abby mentioned, there's like a personal aspect, right? And if I had paid that equal attention, I probably would have like attuned faster. Right, I could have been more capable of like extracting information and relying on my team to like build that like interpersonal element first.
Cool. And then Reese?
So yeah, I definitely think I underprepared, especially compared to everyone else's answer. So I did university, always like wanted to go into games, but never really considered it as a serious option until towards like the end of uni. Got to the end of uni, then started learning Unity, started going to like events like EGX and stuff. Got really lucky and was offered like an internship after only learning Unity for a few months, and was too overeager and went for the programming test really early and didn't get it because I didn't really understand Unity at that point. So yeah, I wish I had prepared a little more, but what I ended up doing was getting a job close to games, so it was VR live streaming, it wasn't VR games, and then that I think is why I'm like, I don't know if it's my first games job, and I think that helped me prepare a lot more for games.
I think the cross-discipline skills especially are something that all of you sort of alluded to the things that are in and around games, even if not directly related to them, and just knowing your stuff from that sort of technical perspective is super useful. And I know coming out of, so I'm also a programmer, coming out of that and just sort of hitting the ground running with Unity and that kind of thing, actually I learned more by just doing stuff than I did actually before going into it, and I think that's super important. But actually, one of the interesting ones that I think not a lot of people talk about, which a couple of you all mentioned in one form or another, are those kind of is the role that social skills and social mobility in terms of the games industry actually plays a big part. The games industry is a very social industry, especially when you compare it to a lot of traditional industries, which I don't think a lot of people realize. Were there any, when you were a new person or looking back now, were there any groups that you sort of spotted that you wish you'd known about at the start, that you'd point new people to now, or any sort of ways that you can, that things like that people should be on the lookout for, whether it's, company events or ways of just sort of socially settling into the games industry, as it were?
Definitely, if you're interested in the games industry, going to EGX's careers booths is really important. Obviously got to throw out the EGX because we're all talking for them, but honestly, like, if EGX and talk to the guys at the sumo panel and the sumo booth talking about Snake Pass and them encouraging me to apply, I might not have applied and I might not be talking to you right now. And everybody's super lovely, and there's always game developers there that are willing to share their knowledge and advice, so it's worth like hearing this and listening to them. And industry as well, like teams are generally very social, so they'll want to chat with you, and they do stuff outside of work, even if it's going to the pub or just hanging out playing video games. When you're there in the studio, then you'd be surprised by the amount of times you end up chatting to like all sorts of people in the kitchen. Like kitchen chats, very important. Make sure you drink tea or coffee, because people chat a lot in the kitchen. So
get your tea
that's
game
how I
sorted ahead
made
of
all
time.
my friends, is chatting in the kitchen. So that's number one hangout spot.
Tea and coffee etiquette are very important in the games industry. Just get it prepped beforehand, know what you're doing, you'll be fine.
That's actually like so true. Like, more actually, touching on another point I realize is that like the way in games is different from every other industry. Is that like kind of everyone in this industry is a gamer, and everyone wants to talk about games and their thoughts and their opinions, the things that they've played, and like how they think they want to push games forward. So like the kitchen is like the spot where you always do that, right? You grab a coffee and you talk about what you think about the industry.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So I'll add like more than just like specific groups as well. Just keep an eye out for, I guess, groups in your area. Like I know there are specific hotspots around the country. Like Guildford has its own sort of meetups and things. And I think I got quite lucky that the one other person in my office was quite social and knew about all these groups, and introduced me, and got me involved in that. And that's how I learned about future jobs and things. Well,
Can I jump back in?
Yeah, of course.
Spoken, but yeah. Like there are a range of groups. I think everyone's sort of touched on it. There are like just the games industry is full of groups, and there's always going to be a group that you can attach yourself to. It's one where like opportunities sort of multiply. So it's a world you want to immerse yourself in. Going to EGX is really important because it gets you around like a wealth of various groups. But there's games industry like Slack, which is really important to get into. I think once you get into the industry, I got into the games industry. I got my foot in the door from Marioki, which is like a karaoke event about video games. But there's POC in play. Like there are so many things, and the more and more like even if you're like trying to get your foot in the door, the more and more you're around them, the more and more those opportunities you'll see and get a chance to actually act upon.
Yeah, I think the way that I got into the games industry to start with was by turning up to an event up in the north called Game Makers Yorkshire, or Gameo. And without that, there's no way I would have found out so much about the games industry as I did, as a student. And I believe off the top of my head that the UKI, the United Kingdom Interactive Entertainment, I think it's uki.org.uk, their website has a list of all the regional ones, which is always a good starting place because you can talk about the weather in your local area. And then beyond that, there are hundreds and hundreds of groups and that kind of thing, and all the groups, generally speaking, have they may have an independent, like singular interest in that kind of thing or a specific area, but all of them will be full of lovely people who just want to talk to you, and they're always interested in helping new people get into ingratiate themselves to the games industry, and that's a super key and important part. Moving away from some of the nicer stuff that we've been talking about. Obviously, when you're in your first year, there is the opportunity for things to not quite go as well as you planned, which can range from the menial to which, as we've discussed, is making a bad cup of tea, to the serious, you accidentally drop a server, to more serious things. And this is a question to all of you. Did anything go wrong in your first year? Were there any issues of any kind? Did something happen? And when that happened, what happened? How did you handle it? How did your company handle it? Did it come out well, or did it come out badly and you learned from it? We'll start with you, Reese.
I don't actually have anything that bad, I think, in my first year.
That's fine.
You're so lucky.
I know. I'm incredibly lucky. Like for what happened, like for my first year as well, I think things could have gone quite badly because I was at a very small startup. All the people I worked with were founders. I was the only employee. So yeah, there was no HR. If I had a problem with anyone, there was no one I could go to. So I was very lucky that they were actually all really great and all looked after me really well, and I learned a lot there. But I guess that is something to look out for, that if you are in a position where you don't, there is that power dynamic and you don't have anyone to go to, be very be careful.
Yeah, in terms of like things going wrong, mistakes I've made, I can't discuss this too much, but I was working at Sumo during the period of time when IO Interactive got dropped by the Square Enix unexpectedly, and we had to try and search for a new publisher with a very, very short space of time, and it was a very stressful time for everybody working at Sumo and IO. I used one of the only people that was left on the Sumo team for a while. I used it as an opportunity to kind of really immerse myself in the animation systems and prove myself as a valuable asset to the project during this time of uncertainty, so that when they inevitably did get their new publisher, then I could hit the ground running and we could continue better than ever, really. So yeah, just used it as an opportunity rather than be, anxious and uncertain, but use it as a chance to learn instead, which ultimately benefited me more than I could ever imagine.
Mm-hmm.
So you're very lucky, Reese.
I mean, I've had difficult situations, just not in my first year, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fortunate enough that I don't think like I was ever responsible for anything sort of catastrophically going wrong or any sort of big problems. Things there've been problems, and I'm very much one to be like, oh my god, how do I go into work tomorrow? I've made a horrible mistake. But like I think it's really important to recognize that like things they go wrong. They're going to go wrong, and that's totally fine. Like it's you don't want to be the person that never makes a mistake because then you never learn. Like you kind of want to be the person who learns from their mistakes, and everyone's happier to work with that person, right? And if you're the top tip is look for an environment where people recognize that, where people sort of are happy to create a space where they know that you're learning, they know that you're going to make mistakes, and they create an environment where you can do that.
Yeah, one of the best bits of advice I've ever received as an animator is fail as fast as possible. So like if you're going to try something, do it quickly, and then when they're like, that's not one, then you know that you haven't wasted a lot of time, but you've learned something from it, and you just keep going until you're happy with something and you come to an agreement. Because there's nothing worse than spending a week on a beautiful piece of animation and them saying it's not what we want, because ultimately it could be the best animation in the world and then it's not appropriate for anything. So failing as fast as possible. You can quote Duncan Brown on that.
Fail fast is definitely a theme across all industries. I think certainly as a programmer, like that's rule number one is just try it, fail it, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, don't worry about it and move on. And I think actually, Gabriel in particular, you touched on the thing that I was going to raise a sort of a summary point, which is that it's about having that team around you that you feel comfortable failing around. And acknowledge and knowing that ahead of time, so that when things go, because one of the big things, and this is something that everyone will probably experience, is something going wrong and you not wanting to tell people about it. Almost always inevitably will result in a worse situation. And actually, the key thing is being comfortable around those people around you. That if you do fail, if something goes wrong, that there is a mistake, or even in like in Abby's case, there's a bigger thing going on that you're just a part of as it's going wrong around you. That you have people that you feel comfortable going to and saying, this has gone wrong, or this is the situation, and trust that those people will, ultimately respect you enough to go, okay, thank you for bringing that to me, and we'll sort it out. And I think that's important. Moving away from the sort of the down, going back up the other way, at the end of your first year, so you're coming to your end point of your 12 months, you're looking back. How did all of you feel? Did you feel, some of you felt settled, some of you weren't quite there yet? But how did you feel about your first year? Did you reflect on it as going, this was great, or did you reflect on it saying that you wish you'd done more? Let's start with Gabriel.
So I feel like a horrible person saying this, but I felt really good at the end of when you consider that like we had just right, like World's Drift was out there. It hadn't done what we wanted. It got cancelled, obviously. Rip Worlds. But I think during that period of time, I'd like demonstrated myself to be like a reliable member of the team. I'd like built confidence as a QA tester. Like not very long after that period, I was moved to senior, which is like an acknowledgement or like of that. So for me personally, it was great. Like a lot of growth. I'd learned, felt a little bit more comfortable in my boots. But like from a company perspective, probably wasn't the best time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I was very fulfilled and proud of everything that I'd learned over the last year, and it was really nice to be acknowledged for all my hard work by being offered a permanent position after my internship. So that was like the icing on the cake, was being told that I was allowed a full-time job at a place that I'd really grown to enjoy working at. So, and ultimately finished the project at the end of it.
Yeah, also fairly happy. So I did 9 months at this VR company, and then got my first job in an actual game studio. So that was all part of my first year. So I feel like, as I say, there was that start point where I felt like I actually didn't know anything, but by the end of that year, I felt like I had learned a lot and settled in. It felt quite normal by that point.
So reflecting on how you feel coming out of your first year, and obviously all of you have now got significantly more experience. You know, you've seen new people joining companies. You've seen, you know, you may or may not have been involved in the hiring process, that kind of thing. When you look at people who, you know, people come to you now and they're like, oh, I'm in my first year in the games industry, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. What is it that you look for in terms of, you know, if you from a mentoring perspective or from just a general sort of wanting to help people perspective, what is the thing that you look for to see if that person is on track? Is there something that they can say, something that they do, their attitude? Is there anything that you think, you know what, that person is going to do well? Is there anything that sort of shines out in that sense? Abby, if you want to go first.
Like I always, whenever I've actually worked with people recently that have joined, and this is their first industry job, and I've been kind of help easing them in, and I've always encouraged them to ask lots of questions and be kind and listen, and just stay humble and hold on to that enthusiasm that drives them, because a lot of people end up losing that over time, and it's really important to be excited about making video games, because ultimately it, you know, encourages you to work harder, and you know it's, you know, of course, before failing as much as possible, and you know, if you make a mistake, you know, it's okay, you've learned that, we need to refocus and drive towards something else, which has been really fulfilling actually, like especially as it was someone that's not an animator, but like an environment artist, that we were in a very close-knit team, so yeah, it's definitely something that people should feel comfortable and kind of proud to like bring new people in. Like you will find that more senior members of staff will be very welcoming generally of new talent, and really happy to share their knowledge and experience. So just absorbing all of that and taking as much info as possible is what you should be doing.
Gabriel, do you want to jump in?
I was like, is Reese gonna jump in? I think if I'm looking for like a sign that someone's gonna do well, I'm probably most looking at like it's an attitude thing, and it's like a positive. Like it's always the people who are like, oh, I work with this guy and he could do this, and I work with this girl and she could do this, and this person could do that. Like those people who are just like full of like positive energy for the things that happen around them and the people around them. They're the ones who are most capable of seeing solutions, because when a problem comes to them, they can most easily recognize the person who's most ascribed to that problem. It's just a trend I've noticed.
Mm-hmm. Fair.
Yeah, I like it when I see someone come in really enthusiastic and humble, like you say, Abby, willing to learn. Like one of the things that I like to see is when, no matter what task they're given, even if it's like, you know, a senior would struggle, they're like, you know, I'll give it a go, and they won't just keep going at it and not tell anyone, even though they're stuck. They're not afraid to ask questions at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I see someone that finds that balance quite early, then I think, yeah, they're going to do well.
So a key thing that's coming out from all of you really is that seeing somebody who takes on that which they're being told and reflects on that and goes, actually, you know, this is important information and I should use this as advice. So taking it back to all of your first years, is there something that you were told that you then didn't actually do anything about and only realised later on, oh, that would have been really useful if I'd actually listened to that and should have employed that in my work and that kind of thing? Are there any particular things that you now think that was just such fantastic, you know, piece of advice or tidbit or whatever it would have been that at the time you may not have taken on as readily? Gabriel, we'll start with you.
I'd say no, but only because I was like, I'm very fortunate to have had some really good mentors around me. At QA, like had a guy, Damien Peter. He had like 20 years of experience in QA. It was like no problem that I couldn't come with him and him have like just a multitude of perspectives on. And then when I was transitioning to production, Imre Yele, he again is like, he's just seen a lot. And it helps to have someone with that kind of perspective around me. So generally, when I went to someone with a problem and they gave me a solution or some solutions, I always trusted their opinion.
That's fair. Reese, go to you.
Yeah, I think I don't have much more to add on that. Yeah, I can't think of anything that there that I think I wish I'd listened to.
Mm.
I like to think that I've taken most things on board. Maybe there's something I haven't and I can't think of it, and that's why I didn't take it on board.
Fair, fair.
But yeah,
I,
sorry.
I have a specific example. So, when I was working on Hitman, we had a scene where Agent 47 is disguised as a tattoo artist, and there's a scene where he finds the wife of the target, and she asks him for a selfie because he's disguised as a celebrity, and we decided, okay, let's make this really crazy. Like, he's gonna do the signature move. And then it completely went against the whole facade that 47 is, and was completely out of character. And it made me realize, instead of just like putting my own stamp on a project, it's especially when working with it's well established intellectual property and working with clients, you need to make sure that you have to be very considered and careful not to potentially damage a brand, and understand where the boundaries are in terms of what you should push and what you shouldn't push. So I learned that really hard, like a slap in the face. Like, no, you can't just do what you want. And I've obviously taken that with me for everything else I've ever done. So it was a lesson worth learning.
What made you aware of that? Was it something that it got so far down the line and then someone saw it?
Yeah.
And went, "Ooh, hang on a minute."
It was an idea that ended up going way too far. Like, we'd already done all the animation for it. Like, we didn't pitch it to IO, which was the stupid. We got all the way to the end, and then they saw the cutscene. They were like, "Absolutely not! There is no way you're allowed this in the game. You have to redo it."
Wow.
So, yeah, that goes back to earlier where I say, like, fail as fast as possible. Didn't fail very fast that time. So. Because it went right to the end, and then we completely failed.
It's interesting to hear Ruth and Gabrielle, just you reflect on having people that you trust in positions that then when they told you something you knew and you went, right, that's it. I accept what you're telling me, and then reflect on it. But also the fact that there is an element of you want to test, especially when you're new and stuff. It's actually better to test stuff and learn and like you said, it's still in a sense it's still failing fast to have tried it, and the fact that no one stopped you and you were like, and all of you were like, yeah, here we go, and it only took somebody going, oh, stop right there, we're not doing that. That actually, and that is a lesson, and it's a reflective point of the fact that your first year, the thing you're going to lack is experience. Like, it's your first year, you're not meant to be experienced at that point. And actually, that's one of the big things you can pull from people who have been doing it for a long time, is that you can trust that they have the experience of doing something. So if they're going to come to you and say, look, don't do it like that because we did it this one time 6 years ago and no one liked it, then you can go, okay, I understand that. It's the thing that I don't have experience in. That's not a reason not to try things, because trying things is important, but also to respect the experience of other people. So, for reflecting on that actually as well, was there any, when you were, this is sort of the reverse of the question, when you go back to your first year and think of it, were there any questions that you had for superiors, for people who were experienced, that you never had answered, or at least didn't have answered in your first year? So whether that be questions that you had for people with experience that you never met, so you never actually met anybody who was senior enough to answer that question, or just a question that nobody could ever give you an answer for, that you only learn, maybe you only learned it by doing it yourself, in your second, third, and fourth year. Reese, we'll start with you this time.
I'm the last person for these questions. Because I worked in a startup where I was working with the founders, I worked directly with the CTO. So there was no one more senior that I could ask. So any question I did get answered. I guess just to contribute something, something that that I've learned since that I wish I'd done, I guess, is something that basically says that there's a lot of conversations that happen where people are discussing something for ages, and he just comes in, tells everyone to stop, and just like do it, try it. It's like, do we test this package? Do we spend the money on buying it? And he's like, you know what? It costs more money to have this conversation. Just do it. So that's a philosophy that I like to think about. Is like, rather than spending ages planning how you're going to do this, just try it. Just, if you're worried about something, just do it, try it. If it doesn't take too long.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, sorry, Gabriel.
I was going to say, it's actually now I reflect, I remember reading a dev diary. I won't like be specific about it, but it was like a retrospective on everything that had gone wrong on a project. And one of the things that they pointed out that the worst problem in that project was that trying to come up with the best possible answer and taking forever to do that is worse than just making an okay decision now. Right, like just make an okay decision now. You can make that better, but if you don't get a decision in place in time, it ruins everything else around it. And that's probably been like the theme of like my career in the last like 3 to 6 months, right? Like the thing what I'm trying to learn, that like you don't need the panacea solution to like like slice the Gordian knot. You just need to get it working, like get functional.
Yeah, definitely. Having that process of like block out and prototyping is extremely important for any project. And having kind of that line not blurred at all, so you know when you're prototyping and what kind of mindset you need to be in when quickly pumping out ideas, and then knowing that difference between when you're actually polishing something that's going to be in the final product and taking the care and the time after you've learned everything from those iterative steps from before. So it's kind of like, for me, I guess the questions that I didn't really get answered in my first year was kind of like, what was I doing that was prototyping, or what was going to be in the final build needed a little bit, but you can get that information from production usually. They usually are the gatekeepers of most knowledge. Sorry, Gabriel.
I'm sure
I don't know anything.
I'm sure producers everywhere would love the title of gatekeepers of knowledge, just gatekeepers of all intelligence around gaming. Everybody, just flood to your producers and ask them; they'll know the answer. One of the interesting things you mentioned there, Abby, particularly, is talking about final product. And actually, I mean, all of you have had success with, either being working on known entities now or been part of games that have been released and that kind of thing. In your first year, there's no guarantees that what you're working on is actually ever going to turn into anything, turn up as anything. What is something that you thought would happen in your first year that never did happen? Whether that was, did you feel like you were going to get more recognition than you did? Did you feel like the company was going to release a game and it didn't happen? Is there anything that you went into your job going, oh yeah, it's going to be amazing because X is going to happen, and then it never did? We'll start with you, Abby.
I was definitely that like stars in your eyes intern where everything was amazing, and then of course it all came crashing down 11 weeks in after the IO Interactive split, and it kind of just sort of like grounds you that the games industry isn't always the most stable business, and anything can happen at any moment. I mean, obviously, I thought that I fully expected to be leaving after the end of my 1 year of internship, and was going to take all that amazing information and then scatter to the wind. But obviously, I was really to be, allowed to continue working at Sumo. But yeah, I mean, I knew that Hitman 2 wasn't going to come out that year, so I didn't really have to think anything like that. And obviously, you don't really get that kind of, it's hard to explain, like when a game's announced, like your first game's announced, it is literally the greatest feeling in the entire world, like that everybody's finally seeing it for the first time, all your hard work. It's also the scariest thing in the world, because there's nothing worse than like reading those YouTube comments that are like, hate it, it's rubbish. The thing is the game developers will read them all. That's something that you should consider as well. Like, if you'd like to post online, game developers are going to look out all the comments about their game, good and bad. So kind of be mindful of that when you post on the internet.
Definitely. Reese, do you want to go next?
So I didn't go into the industry with massive expectations because it was it's not last minute, but kind of after uni, I decided I didn't consider it for a long time. I guess I considered that I would release a game, not my first year, but at some point, and it's been 4 years, and I've not technically released a game yet.
Oh,
and I think,
no.
Some, yes, unfortunate circumstances. But I think that's normal. I know a lot of people that haven't released games that are really good at their jobs. And yeah, sometimes it's just the circumstance that plays out. So yeah, if you go into your first job and you don't release a game, it's not the be all end all.
I like I wanted to get into games for a really long time. I think I've said this before. Like got like I started my sort of romantic about it, and I'd watched like a lot of dev diaries, like seen a lot of documentaries, and I expected to come in and it'd be this sort of like crazy creative space where there are people just like throwing ideas at the wall and seeing what stuck, and that does happen, right? But it's every idea, every decision has like a wealth of work behind it. You don't just go, oh, there's this thing, and then it happens in a game. There's like there are teams that with completely different skills that have to make that a reality. And so it was like this realization that it's far more science than alchemy, right? Like it's not just this sort of magical thing. It's a business. It's work, and it takes time to get it right. And like figuring out the process is part of it. It's not just unbridled creativity. It's work. It's a chore. It's hard at times, and it is great. It is fun, and you do get those moments where everyone's like having like lively conversations about the thing. But at the end of the day, the bulk of it is sitting down and getting it done.
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting point on that actually. Is that it comes through from all of it. Is that one of the things I think a lot of people think going to games industry is because it's so different that it is this sort of joyous, rainbow-coloured, basically Fall Guys, just amazing dream place where everyone comes in and everything's coloured and bright and happy, which it is. Don't get me wrong, but it's also a job, and there is also work to be done, and there is a lot of days of just sitting, getting your head down, and doing what needs to be done. And like Reese mentioned, not everybody releases a game immediately. To add on to the pile as well, so we released a game 3 months in, a small mobile title, and then all of our work since then has been client work. So we've not released another game since then, and we've now been going 5 years. It's not a given that you're just going to get in and your name will be on the next big title. What is a given is that you'll be in the space where you do get to be creative and you do get to put your input into things. Not all the time and not every day, but certainly more than you would in a lot of industries, and that's one of the best things about it. Moving on then, I think coming on to some of the last couple of questions. Obviously, all of you have been in for significantly more than 1 year now. If you could go, what is look back? There's two ways of looking at this question. Either, what is the most important lesson that you've learned, either in your first year or in total, and then either that, or if you could go back and tell yourself one thing, even if it's not the most important thing that you've learned in total, but is something that you think is vital to someone in their first year, what would you go back and tell yourself? We'll start with you, Abby.
Oh man, I mean, the most important lesson I've learned is that you're always learning, and no matter what you do, there's always going to be a new challenge, a new question that needs an answer, and that's totally fine. Like, it's totally fine not to know everything, and because nobody else knows everything. And experiences are completely different and all equally valid. So, that would be kind of the most important lesson, is just to kind of embrace everybody's experience, regardless of what it is, because they might have a perspective that you might not have. But if I could go back and tell myself one thing, it would be don't do as much overtime as I did. Because as a junior or an intern, you do feel like a compellment to just work and work and work to prove yourself. But it's really important to also remember that you have to have a good work-life balance, or else your mental health and performance at work during the time you're supposed to be working will suffer for it. So only do overtime if you have to do overtime. Not that I don't think overtime is great, but you shouldn't have to do overtime if you don't have to.
Yeah, that's fair. Gabriel?
I think if I could go back and tell myself one thing, it's probably like the recognition that like code, art, design, all that stuff, they're part of games, but they don't make games. People make games, right? Like, and you need to. It's important to, if as long as you're being upfront, professional, and hardworking about all that other stuff, it'll kind of take care of itself because that the institution exists to do that. The thing that you need to make sure that you're not dropping, at least myself anyway, was that the people element, that the people are happy working with you, that they're comfortable working with you, that you're making them feel happy and comfortable working with you. And if you do that, they'll take care of the rest. Like, a happy coder is more likely to code well.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. I think the most general lesson I would say is what Abby's been saying a lot is the fail fast. Sometimes it's easier to explain the problem you're having if you fail and then show the failure, and like show part of what you've done. I think I learned that lesson at some point, but knowing it earlier on, I think would have helped. A more specific lesson for me would have been learn shaders early on if you're a programmer, because learning them now.
We're going to call me out like this. Come on.
Yeah, there's not many people that great with shaders. So if you can learn them early in your career and get good at them as a programmer, it's a very valuable skill.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I don't even expect that to come out, and it's 100% true. Shaders, they're magic. Learn them. Excellent. Well, yeah. I mean, the last thing is, does anyone have any final thoughts on their first year or anything that they want to share with people? No?
Be humble, fail fast, enjoy it, because it's awesome to learn and have the opportunity to be paid to learn. So just embrace it and have fun. That's all I'm going to say. Have fun, because it's awesome. We love being game developers, or else we wouldn't be here. So.
I'll say find the right environment. It's really important. Like, when you're in that interview and they're like, "Hey, do you have any questions to ask us?" It's a really important moment to find out like about the people that you're going to be working with. Figure out if that's the right environment for you, because it'll set the tone for the rest of your career.
Be humble. You don't have to be friends with everyone, but be professional. Like, it's actually a small industry, so you might end up working with that person you met at an event. But that also goes for other people. So if you see someone else not being great, then also, industry is small.
We've had several people say be humble, and no one said be humble, sit down yet. So I'm just going to get that out there because
we're all already sitting, right?
I felt like has to be said. I think the key thing here, one of the key pieces is definitely have fun. This is a fantastic industry working in, and if you are watching this and you are just going into your first year or halfway through, or whatever it may be, it's a fantastic opportunity to learn. This is a fantastic industry, and if we didn't think so, none of us would be here now, several years later, telling you that it's a fantastic industry. So all that's left for me to do is to say thank you very much to Reese, thank you very much to Abby, and thank you very much to Gabriel for joining us. This has been a Back to Group panel talking about your first year, what to expect. Please enjoy the rest of EGX Digital, and thanks for stopping by. Bye.